My first church consulting job was supposed to be a half-day workshop with an entire leadership team, but it ended up being a 3-hour one-on-one meeting with just the pastor in a Panera. And I drove 4.5 hours each way, and I stayed in a hotel for one night on my own dime, and I only charged $500 for the whole thing. To say it was a flop is an understatement, but I'm going to share with you today about why this was the best thing that could have happened to me. My name is Scott Ball. Welcome to the Church Consulting Lab. Let me give you a little bit of background. I had been blogging and sharing leadership content online for about a year. I had been building an email list from scratch. I had an email lead magnet that was doing pretty well, was starting to gain some traction, but it just hadn't led to any on-site church consulting work yet. So when I had packaged together a high-performance leadership team workshop and sent that out to my email list, and someone responded and said, yes, I want that for my church, man, I thought I had really made it. I remember thinking, this is it. I'm finally doing the thing. I'm going to be a church consultant. I was so excited. I had this dream of making church consulting my full-time thing. I wanted to provide for my family and to serve churches because that really is my heart and my passion. And to be honest, it really was a breakthrough, just not the breakthrough that I was expecting. So I drive 4.5 hours, and meeting in a Panera was not a negative part of the story. It makes it a little bit silly and makes it a little bit more awkward given what ended up happening. But this is a church that was a church plant. They still were setting up and tearing down. They didn't have a permanent location. So I drive down the day before, spend the night in a hotel on my own dime. And when I showed up at the Panera, the pastor wasn't there yet. He let me know he was on his way. And when he showed up, he was by himself. He was alone. And I remember thinking, okay, well, maybe they're going to all show up later. And he said, no, the rest of the team can't make it. It's just going to be the two of us. I leaned in like any dedicated church consultant would. I delivered that entire workshop, just me and him. I essentially taught him how to facilitate the workshop himself. The irony being, I hadn't facilitated the workshop with a whole group yet either. And it really was good content. In fact, some of the stuff that I developed for that workshop still lives on in things that I do today. So the problem wasn't the content. The problem wasn't the workshop. The problem was every other mistake I had made leading up to that point. So today I want to share you what are some lessons that I learned from that experience, things that hopefully you can avoid, mistakes that hopefully you won't make as you start or grow your church consulting ministry. So let's dive in. Mistake number one, my pricing was too low, way too low. Now, there's a lot of consultants out there who are charging way too much. So overpricing is also a mistake that you should avoid, especially early on when you're just trying to gain some experience and you're trying to gain, have some of those, not just on your belt, so to speak, some experience along the way. It's definitely appropriate to skew towards the lower side in your pricing when you're just getting started. So, but I had gone way too low. I really had missed the mark. So let's just run through the math of this. For a half-day workshop, I charged $500, which when you think about it, $500 for a half a day of work, that's pretty good money when you think about it. But you got to think through the whole thing here. I don't know exactly what the mileage breaks down to be, so I'm just going to estimate. But let's say 4.5 hours each way. Let's say that's $250 in mileage. And I know I spent about $100 on a hotel, somewhere around that. And let's say I had another $50 in incidentals and so on, meals and other things. So I spent $400 and I charged $500. That means I made $100 on that, which is not enough to pay my mortgage. Remember, my dream was to do this full time, to be able to provide for my family and to support churches, and this is just not going to make it. So understanding pricing is really important. We'll have future training in the Church Consulting Lab on how to think about pricing, but just know Obviously, I made a mistake by all of my expenses being covered by me, and that's okay, actually, to include those costs in the sticker price, but you need to account for that. I needed to know what these costs were going to be and charge them up front, so that at least the price should have been $900, so that I walked away with the $500 and not just $100. So there were things that I could have done if I was just trying to gain more experience and, sort of undersell myself a little bit just so that I can gain that experience. That's totally okay early on. But you at least need to account for your costs so that you're not in the hole losing money or only walking away with $100. That's just not going to do it. The other problem with pricing too low is that you diminish the quality. Lowering the price actually lowered the quality or the appearance of the quality. And so you need to understand, what is it worth? So this was mistake number one, pricing too low. Mistake number two is I had no clear onboarding process. So I really was just winging it. I didn't even know that I needed an onboarding process. I figured that once the proposal was signed, I just set the dates and I showed up and we were good to go. Maybe I emailed them the materials in advance so they can print some things off, or maybe I would just print those things off myself and bring them. I just didn't know. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know how any of that was going to work, and I didn't even know that I needed a process. But you need an onboarding process. The onboarding process starts when the proposal is signed. Once you get that proposal or that consulting agreement signed, once that's signed, what do you do next? What happens next? What emails are you going to send? What are those early deliverables? Those things that you're providing for the church as a work product. Perhaps you have some training that you want them to go through in advance. Perhaps there's some surveys or there's some assessments that you want them to go through. But you want them to be invested in the process so that there is buy-in early. Before you're on site, before you're doing more things with them in person, you want them invested in the process, not just with their deposit, not just with the money, but with their time and their energy and the effort, so that by the time that you're there on site, they're really looking forward to what's going to be happening next, what's going to be part of this process, how is this going to be helpful for our church. And so you really need a clear onboarding process. I serve as the vice president of the Malfors Group, and at the Malfors Group, we have a process called strategic envisioning and a process called leadership pipeline design. And in both of those processes, once a church signs the proposal, we have very specific things that churches need to do in order to be successful and in order to keep the process on time and moving forward. And so as soon as we get that signed proposal, I know exactly what email I'm going to send. I know what meeting I'm going to schedule. I know what's going to be happening next. This builds confidence in the process. It also builds buy-in in the process. Again, not just with their resources, but with their time. Okay? So have a clear onboarding process, and that's a mistake that I made. Mistake number three. Mistake number three is that I was desperate. Again, it's understandable. I had been blogging for a year, putting out leadership content for a year. And so because I was just so ready to have that first client and that first experience, I was willing to settle on certain things, and it diminished, again, just like how having too low of a price diminished the perceived value of the thing. This desperation led to a lower quality experience for the church. Remember, having standards isn't about you, it's about the church. If you don't have clear standards, then they're not going to have a good experience. And if they're not going to have a good experience, then it's not going to be a good referral for you. So it does hurt you, but it's not about going, well, I'm not going to waste my time with a church unless they do XYZ thing. It isn't about that. It's that you know what it takes for them to have a good experience. And so you have these standards to ensure quality experience for them, for their sake, for their benefit. So having standards does not mean that you aren't flexible. I take a lot of pride in this. So you really want to be flexible. People are going to be dealing with different things. People are going to be dealing with different issues. And just because you have standards doesn't mean that you're not being flexible. You want to be really gracious. Maybe you have some different online components to your onboarding process or to the initial phases or whatever, and your main contact is someone who struggles with technology. So being flexible with them and going, okay, well, here's a different way that we can do this. Or I was actually just working with a client recently who we do some training videos, and their internet's not super awesome. Their Wi-Fi is not super awesome in their space, and they said, hey, I know you probably don't normally want churches to download the videos, you want them to stream them, which is true, but do you mind if we download them so that we don't have problems showing them in our space because our Wi-Fi is not great where we're doing that? Absolutely. So you're going to be flexible, but that doesn't mean you can't have standards. Process things. You want the team a certain size, they need to go through certain steps. And again, the reason why you have the standards is because you want to ensure a quality experience for the church. And because I wasn't really clear, like, here are my expectations. The workshop needs to be done this way. I mean, even though doing it in a Panera was part of the plan from the beginning, it wasn't a good part of the plan because that also seemed to diminish the quality of the work. We're doing a workshop at a Panera? Like, I could have said, hey, no, you need a space. Surely they have some other space where they hold other kinds of meetings. So I could have said, no, I really want you to block off this time, and here's how I want you to communicate with your elders so that they understand the importance of this time together. There are things that I could have done that would have risen the level of standards for the church, and that would have been a better experience for them. But because I was desperate, because I was ready to get started, I didn't take the time to set those standards. So these are 3 key mistakes that I made that I definitely want you to avoid, and they're easily avoidable, but they're not always obvious when you're first getting started. Here's the thing, even though it was a disaster, that Panera consulting session was exactly what I needed. And here's the biggest lesson of all that I came away with, that I actually could do this. That meeting, that session, that first consulting job, even though in a lot of ways it was a total flop, it gave me the confidence that I needed to keep moving forward. And guess what? 10 years later, I'm still doing it full time. So if you're thinking about church consulting, maybe doing it full time as a side hustle, or maybe you're a denominational leader and you do it as part of your job with the denomination, listen, you're going to make mistakes, and that's totally okay. What matters most is that we learn from them. I want to help you avoid some of the painful lessons that I learned early on, and that's why I started this channel with 3 videos. Why don't you check out how to create your first lead magnet step by step. That will help you get that first client even faster than I did. And please subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be sharing with you lessons that I wish that I had learned earlier on every week. And let me know in the comments, what's the biggest fear that you're facing as you're starting or growing your church consulting ministry? I promise you I read every single comment, especially in these early days of the channel. I want to be sure that I respond to every single one and help you out. Thanks for watching. See you next time in the Church Consulting Lab.